I don't think the word forgive is quite appropriate here. You can either come to terms with infidelity or not. If a person comes to terms with it, that doesn't necessarily mean they have forgiven it. Infidelity cannot be forgiven, it will always be present in life. When someone decides to cheat, they must understand that if the truth comes out, which is inevitable, there will be no forgiveness. For some reason, people, especially women, fail to grasp this. A real man, if he is a true man and not just someone who happens to have a certain body part, will never forgive infidelity, nor will he come to terms with it. Living with a woman who has cheated is akin to smoking someone else's used cigarettes. The reason for the infidelity is secondary here. Excuses like, he didn't love me, he didn't satisfy me, or, he didn't see me as a woman, don't work. If life with your husband is unsatisfactory, get a divorce. But most women want to stay married while also catching butterflies on the side. A woman who cheats on her husband is in a constant state of infatuation, which she mistakenly perceives as love. Children, a long marriage, none of that matters to her anymore, especially if her lover is younger. Eventually, the husband finds out, and she leaves with her head held high, running off to her beloved, while destroying everything she had spent years building. But that love never lasts long. Sooner or later, delayed realization sets in, bringing tears, pleas, and visits to the ex-husband. Suddenly, she remembers she has children, dragging them into the chaos. Any means are fair game: manipulation, blackmail, tantrums. But by then, all that remains of the once happy family is ashes, and the past can never be restored. My mother left us when I was just over 2 years old. My father never remarried and poured all his love into me. His sister, Aunt Olya, helped raise me. Every summer, I stayed at her country house and played with her children, Nina and Vadim. When I was 17, my father died suddenly, leaving me alone. After finishing school, I enrolled in the Leningrad Artillery School. My cadet days began. I had no idea where my mother was or what she was doing, and to be honest, I didn't really care. To me, she didn't exist. I felt nothing for her. Once, I found a photo of her in an album, but my father quickly removed it, and after that, nothing in the house reminded me of her. After graduation, I served in the army for a while before being sent as an instructor to an African country. My task was to train their military in artillery warfare. I was assigned to a mortar battery, and since I didn't know the local language, I worked with a translator. I served there for a year and a half. One day, on the way back from training, I made a critical mistake. I drank water from a local source. It was hot, and I couldn't resist. As a result, I contracted hepatitis and was sent home for treatment. I spent about 2 months in the hospital. Hepatitis is a stubborn illness. But I didn't waste time. I met a charming nurse named Vera, and we started a romance. I was inexperienced with women, and Vera seemed like the center of my world. By the time I was discharged from the hospital, we were married. I was assigned to serve in the Baltics, and Vera moved with me. Soon, our son Igor was born. I wanted more children, but Vera was categorically against it, saying she was still young and wanted to live for herself. That was the first warning sign, but I ignored it. The army demanded all my time. Long deployments to conflict zones left me with little opportunity to be with my family. In the military, personal problems don't matter. Service comes first, from dawn to dusk. You get 2 days off a year, 1 in summer and 1 in winter. The rest is all duty. I missed my wife and son terribly. When I was home, I tried to spend as much time with them as possible. But at some point, I noticed that my presence seemed to bother Vera. She didn't seem happy to see me, and even Igor started becoming distant. Then, I was sent on an overseas mission. I expected to be gone for a month, but it turned into nearly 6. During that time, I tried calling home several times, but I could never get through. I wrote letters, but Vera only replied once, using generic phrases that felt more like an obligation than a message from a loving wife. That was the only letter I ever received from her. Everything eventually comes to an end, including my deployment. I returned to my unit, completed my debriefing, and rushed home. Rushed is an understatement. I was flying on wings. Vera wasn't home. Igor was playing outside under the supervision of a neighbor. When she saw me, she looked uncomfortable and told me Vera had gone to the store. She agreed to watch Igor a little longer, but I could tell she wasn't telling me something. I took Igor by the hand, and we walked home. He chatted happily, telling me about his kindergarten friends and how Papa Kostya sometimes picked him up when Mama was busy. Papa who? I stopped in my tracks. Papa Kostya, Igor said cheerfully. He loves me and promised to get me a big red car. Then he looked up at me and asked, "Uncle, are you staying long?" I swallowed hard. "I'm not uncle, I'm your father," Igor frowned. "No, my papa is Kostya. Mama says we'll be going far away with him soon." The boy smiled, happy and unaware of the bomb he had just dropped. Surprisingly, I kept my composure. I should have been overwhelmed with despair, demanding answers from Vera. Instead, I just felt a cold numbness. When we got home, I gave Igor his presents and went to the bathroom. As I turned on the shower, I heard the front door slam. Vera had arrived. I took my time, wiping off with a towel I had brought from my duffel bag. The thought of touching anything in that apartment disgusted me. I stepped out of the bathroom, and Vera was bustling in the kitchen. "Welcome home," she beamed, trying to kiss me on the cheek. "Sit down, I'll make you something to eat." I stepped back. "Sit down, Vera. Let's talk." A chill settled inside me, extinguishing any anger. I felt like I was watching myself from the outside, as if this was happening to someone else. Vera hesitated, then slowly sat down on a stool. "How long have you been involved with Papa Kostya?" I asked. "And when exactly are you planning to go far away?" Her face fell. She shrank back, avoiding my gaze. "Where did you—" "Doesn't matter," I interrupted. "Answer the question." She sighed. "Almost a year." "I see. I didn't mean for it to happen," she said in a small voice. "I wanted to leave him, but I couldn't. With him, I feel like a woman, loved, desired." "You're never home enough," I cut her off. "You made your choice. I'll file for divorce. I'll visit Igor when I can. And remember, the apartment is government-owned. You'll need to find somewhere else to live." I threw my duffel over my shoulder, grabbed my cap, and headed for the door. "Aren't you even going to ask who he is?" Vera sobbed. I shrugged. "Does it matter?" She cried as I walked out, but I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just an empty coldness. Life plays cruel tricks. First, my mother abandoned me. Now, my wife had betrayed me. She had even tried to take my son away. But time would tell what lay ahead. At the divorce hearing, Vera went out of her way to paint me as the villain. She accused me of all sorts of sins, claiming that I had a mistress, that I had neglected her and Igor, and that I had abused her. To my surprise, even our neighbor supported her claims, though she couldn't look me in the eyes while doing so. I looked at Vera with a hint of admiration. She had skillfully transformed herself from the guilty party into the victim of domestic violence. I didn't argue. If they wanted to label me a cheater, so be it. The elderly female judge gave Vera a sympathetic look, gender solidarity at work. "Men are all the same, and we women are such fools to trust them," her expression seemed to say. The ruling was straightforward: divorce, alimony, and restricted access to my son without Vera's permission. But she got nothing else. The apartment was government-issued, and we had no other shared assets. Vera's so-called Papa Kostya never showed up in court. As we exited the courthouse, I turned to Vera and asked, "Aren't you ashamed of yourself?" She didn't answer. For a while, I lived in the office's dormitory. Vera kept me away from Igor, so I could only watch him from a distance. That's when I first saw Papa Kostya, a smug, cocky-looking guy with an arrogant smirk permanently glued to his face. The kind of guy who exuded entitlement and superiority. "Women, where are your brains and eyes?" "Oh, wait. I know exactly where they are." Catching the pitying glances of my colleagues was the hardest part. No one spoke about my divorce openly, but I knew they were all aware. A month passed, and then, out of nowhere, Vera showed up at the dormitory. She had lost her confidence, her usual arrogance was gone. "Can I come in?" she asked hesitantly, standing at my door. "Go ahead," I replied indifferently. I had no desire to waste energy or emotions on this woman. She sat down, hesitated for a moment, and then said with a forced bravado, "Your son is about to lose his home." "What do you mean?" I asked, unimpressed. "They're making us vacate the government apartment," she said quickly. "They offered us a tiny dump in the middle of nowhere." I stayed silent. There was nothing to say. I had warned her about this before. "You have an apartment in your hometown," she continued, trying to keep her voice steady. "Sell it and help your son." I smiled coldly. "Sorry, darling, you knew what you were getting into. That apartment is mine, and I'll need it myself. You're heartless." She snapped. "Even Kostya was right about you." I stood up. "You have exactly 1 second to leave, Vera. And make sure I never see you again." She grabbed her bag and bolted out of the room. 2 weeks later, I returned from duty to find Vera at the barracks entrance, holding Igor's hand. "You need to watch him for a while," she said hastily. "Kostya and I are moving. Once we settle in, I'll take him back." I looked at Igor. "So, your lover is done playing house with someone else's kid?" She didn't respond. I took my son in my arms. She said nothing and left. A month later, I was transferred to a southern base. Life picked up its pace, and little by little, the cold inside me started to thaw. Most importantly, Igor was with me. He grew up quickly, and at first, he would ask about his mother. Then, one day, he stopped. As if he had finally understood everything. Vera never tried to contact me or Igor again. I had left my address at the barracks just in case, but she never used it. Life was tough as a single father, and for a while, I even considered remarrying. I thought it would be good for Igor to have some form of motherly care. But I soon realized that no woman truly wants to raise another woman's child. Society expects men to love and care for stepchildren as their own, but women are never held to that same expectation. I decided not to risk it. So, I lived alone. If I ever had a fling, I kept it far away from my home. I didn't want to bring strangers into my son's life. 15 years passed. Igor was now in military academy, and by a twist of fate, I found myself back in my hometown. A military academy had been established, and I was appointed its head. I never imagined I'd be wearing a general's uniform, but life works in strange ways. There was more work than I could handle, but by autumn, things settled down, and I finally had some free time. One evening, I realized I was out of bread. Not a tragedy, but I couldn't imagine dinner without it. Too lazy to change into proper clothes, I threw on some sweatpants and a hoodie and headed to the nearest supermarket. And that's where I saw her, Vera. She looked well-groomed, trying to appear younger than she was. When she sensed my gaze, she turned, scanning me from head to toe. "Life didn't turn out too well for you, did it?" she smirked. I raised an eyebrow. "What makes you think that?" "Oh, come on, I can see it," she said confidently. She studied me, waiting for me to ask about her life, to show interest. But I remained silent. Finally, she broke. "How is Igor?" she asked, her expression softening. "He's fine," I replied curtly. 2 years left in the academy. Vera hesitated. She wanted to ask more but held back. At that moment, a young girl approached her. "Mom, who is this?" Vera's expression shifted. "Just an old acquaintance from work," she said dismissively. Then, turning back to me, she asked, "Do you have a business card?" I chuckled. "Why would I need one?" "Here, take mine," she insisted. "If you ever need anything, food, shelter, don't hesitate to reach out." She turned gracefully and walked off, arm in arm with her daughter. I glanced at the business card and tossed it into the trash. Then, I grabbed my bread and went home. More years passed. By then, I had become a lieutenant general. I was flying to Igor's graduation when I spotted Vera again, this time in the airport. She was with an elegant woman and a pompous, overweight colonel who reeked of self-importance. Vera saw me and hesitated, then decided to introduce me. "This is an old colleague of mine," she said. The colonel eyed me with amusement. "Oh, you served too? Where? What rank?" Vera tried to change the subject, but I answered, "Many places." "And rank?" "Lieutenant." The colonel chuckled smugly. "Not everyone has the luck to rise through the ranks, huh?" Vera smirked. "Yes, not everyone." He turned back to his newspaper, unimpressed. The plane landed, and as I stepped off, a young officer saluted me sharply. "General Lieutenant, sir. Your car is waiting." I turned back to Vera and the colonel. His jaw dropped. The two women froze in place. "Need a ride?" I offered casually. They shook their heads, speechless. I climbed into my military vehicle and left without looking back. At the academy, I spotted Igor talking to a woman. When he saw me, he smiled and walked over. The woman turned around. It was Vera. She stared at my uniform, trying to reconcile it with the man in sweatpants at the supermarket years ago. "I came to congratulate him," she said hesitantly. "You told me he was graduating." Igor frowned. "Who is she, Dad?" "Your mother," I said simply. Igor's face hardened. "I have no mother. The person who gave birth to me died a long time ago." He turned to me. "Let's go, Dad." As we got into the car, I glanced back. Vera stood there, clutching her hands to her chest, watching us disappear.